John Wagner is a political reporter for The Washington Post joining us now. John, let's start with the fact that Vice President Pence spoke moments ago at a press conference and was asked a question about his reaction to President Trump doubling down on those comments that, quote, both sides bared some responsibility in the violence in Virginia. What did you think of Vice President Pence's remarks?
Well, I think one interesting thing about his remarks is it kind of reminds you of how politicians normally handle these circumstances. Both over the weekend and then again today, he's performing somewhat of a cleanup role for President Trump, and saying words. Over the weekend, he was the first to say out of his own mouth that the KKK and neo-Nazis are not acceptable, and to condemn them in terms the president hadn't to this point. So I do think he's trying to contain the damage for the administration, but it also underscores what President Trump has said and not said himself.
His words were a lot weaker than the ones we just replayed by other Republicans. He said, I quote, stand by him. Not everyone in the White House was okay with what happened yesterday. There were rumors that economic advisor Gary Cohn, who was standing next to the president in Trump Tower when he made those remarks, Gary Cohn, the man there on the far left, rumors that he actually threatened to resign. He has not so far. But what is your sense of the level of frustration in the White House?
Oh, I think there's a great deal of frustration, and there are a lot of calculations going on right now among White House aides and those who are otherwise close to the president about what do I need to do to see my agenda furthered, and is that worth it to stay in proximity to this president? And I think we're going to see people coming down on different sides of that divide. As you've seen a number of business leaders leaving the Manufacturing Council and potentially other councils advising the president. So a lot of that is still to play out, and I think we'll know more about how it does in the next few hours and days here.
More and more Republicans have condemned the president's stance. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell adding his voice to criticism. How do Republicans in Congress move forward with their agenda under this shadow? Does this become a barrier for them?
Well, on issues like tax reform, that's really a shared priority between members of Congress and the president. So I think you're going to see, the Republican leaders in Congress trying to do their best to marshal support, among their ranks. But the president traditionally plays a very important role when you have a heavy lift like tax reform. And to the extent that he's weakened and the extent that he remains, unpopular in the polls, and if there's an additional hit, it just becomes all that much harder for him to go out and sell the public on any plans that Congress is pushing, and to sell wavering members. We've already seen with the health care fight that's can be a challenging task for President Trump. And it becomes all the more challenging if Republican members of Congress don't fear him or really don't want to be associated with him.
You mentioned that backlash that we're seeing from the business community. Now, 2 more members of Trump's Manufacturing Council have quit, bringing the total number to 8. 3M CEO Inga Thulin and Campbell's CEO Denise Morrison dropped out today. We had AFL-CIO Chief Richard Trumka quit after Trump's remarks yesterday. Here he is on CBS This Morning.
Yesterday, the president's statement really unveiled his true feelings about the situation in Charlottesville and around the country, and it was unacceptable what he said.
Which one, Richard? Which one got to you? Which one?
His spirited defense of racism and bigotry, the ultra-right, white nationalism, neo-Nazis, and the KKK, when he tried to put equal blame on both sides, when these organizations at their stem and at their core are based on racism and bigotry. That's unacceptable. That's an un-American value. And when he gave that defense of them, and sort of put a pox on everybody's house, it became too much for us to be associated with that. So the issue of the Manufacturing Council is separate, quite frankly, from the symbolism of being associated with it.
The AFL-CIO had obviously a hugely politically influential group, but other titans of industry have defected as well. How significant are these defections in the grand scheme of things?
Well, I think truth be told, these councils don't drive a lot of policy. The optics have been good for the president to have, as you put it, titans of industry surrounding him and appearing to be on board with his agenda. And kind of the irony here is the events of recent days have allowed this council to become a platform for these members to criticize the president and kind of give an additional heft to their criticism. Whether that alone affects the policy agenda going forward is hard to say, but it certainly has created a forum for more criticism of the president.
So with all this condemnation and the danger it could do, why do you think the president made those comments yesterday?
Well, it's hard to get inside his head, but I think, given what we saw over the course of several days where he kind of veered back and forth, it certainly seemed like he was, speaking what he really believed yesterday, and had been frustrated with efforts by aides and others to guide him to what he would consider a more politically correct space. So I think, we just saw kind of an unvarnished Donald Trump.
Today, President Trump did tweet this: a memorial service today for beautiful and incredible Heather Heyer, a truly special young woman. She will be long remembered by all. And yet, yesterday during the comments, John, the president, while calling the driver of the vehicle a murderer, he has not called this an incident of terrorism. Did that surprise you?
Well, one would think it'd be, a fairly easy call to make, and obviously the contrast is fairly jarring when other episodes have occurred that he's been very quick to call terrorism, even in some cases where all the facts haven't been in when he's done so. So, whether it's surprising is it's a little hard to say, but there certainly would be reason to think that a president would do that in that case.
It was one thing when candidate Trump, John, used to make inflammatory remarks on the campaign trail. It is another thing to do it from the bully pulpit. Is he doing damage to the office?
Well, I mean, there's certainly those who think he is, and there's been, ever since he got into office, there's been talk about when he's going to pivot to be more presidential. And I think what we've learned, if we hadn't already over the last few days, is that Donald Trump is. What you saw on the campaign trail is kind of what you're going to get for the remainder of his presidency in all likelihood.
John Wagner. Thank you, John.
Thank you.